Hello, my name is Jack Milburn, and I'm going to be taking you on an adventure through the James Bond franchise. To start off with, I will say that I'm a huge James Bond fan, and delving into the world of Bond was a fascinating experience to say the least. Within this podcast, I will discuss certain opinions I hold for performances and critiques of specific films, discussing topics as which Bond reboot fared better, Timothy Dalton in the 1980s versus Daniel Craig's in the 2000s. Analysing why one worked better than the other. Later on, I will be introducing the idea of feminism in what is a very masculine franchise in the context of Judi Dench's portrayal of the pivotal M and her character traits, including discussing how the role of Miss Moneypenny evolved negatively during certain Bond eras.
My name is Bond.
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 James Bond.
Each time there is a new actor playing the role of the British MI6 Special Agent James Bond, the producers evolve the character from its previous incarnation, adding traits, skills, and different temperaments. However, the core values of Queen and country before anything else is left untouched within the Bond ethos. For example, during a poker game, they both have this upper lip, body language, and a certain British suaveness, mixed with an ego of the size of the room itself. This portrayal of Bond had been going on from 1962 with the release of Dr. No. Because of how this laborious and similar style of Bond had been going on for 2 decades, the franchise was decaying and needed to be revamped for the public. So during the year 1987, The Living Daylights came out, with a whole new angle to the Bond portrayal, who was played by Timothy Dalton. Dalton's Bond was more of a rogue agent rather than an agent which served Queen and country before anything else. He fought for what he believed to be true and righteous. However, this complete 100-degree change in ethos, Bond still of course had the charm and charisma with women. However, the producers did not take a sledgehammer to the Bond ethos and change everything, but they altered what I believe is the truest backbone of the Bond character, his love for Queen and country. This trait gives the character a moral stance. He will do anything if it means upholding his and the British values and interests around the world. After all, everyone has a moral code they stand by, and giving a character that has a license to kill a morality trait is highly necessary in order for them to be likeable and relatable.
Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
During both of Dalton's Bond films, he defies MI6 orders to not kill his intended target in The Living Daylights and disobeys orders to not seek revenge for the killing of his friend and his wife in the License to Kill film. These actions are not ones of a highly trained special agent with a moral code of upholding the British interests. These are actions by a very egocentric character, out for his own desires. Despite part of Bond's egocentric trait throughout all Bonds, it is most prevalent in Dalton's portrayal. This is because of his 180-degree switch around of the character core. This is why I believe that Timothy Dalton's Bond did not perform well with fans and at the box office, mainly down to the producer's misguided attempts in trying to revitalise the franchise, which had not been increasing its box office performance during the Moore era. Do you know how much Sean Connery's salary was for Diamonds Are Forever? And now remember, this was released in 1971, so guess well, and the answers will come later. During Pierce Brosnan's time as James Bond, the producers had moved the character away from that of Dalton's. They had moved the character's traits back into the similar format of Connery and Moore's, that is, of an egocentric character which is solely based around boyish charisma. They decided to point out how outdated Bond is in a technological world and an increasingly feminist conscious world. Despite this start for Brosnan, these topics were never touched on again after GoldenEye 1995, until Craig came along 4 years later in a more successful reboot of the franchise.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Jumping to the early 2000s now, where we had another reboot of the James Bond franchise in the form of Daniel Craig in Casino Royale in 2006, after poor reception from Pierce Brosnan's Die Another Day in 2002. Craig's Bond still held the morality trait of Queen and Country, if not more than any other Bond in the franchise. His relationship with Judi Dench's M was new as well. It was a maternal relationship and a connection between both characters. This is a completely new facet to the franchise, which we will discuss in depth later on. Furthermore, Craig's Bond started off with a physicality not seen in the franchise before. He was physically stronger, which accentuated his masculinity even more so than previous Bonds. In every Bond film from Dr. No in 1962 to the latest one as of 2019, Spectre in 2015, there has been a fight scene or a more physical single foe that Bond had to either overpower or outthink. From Connery up to Brosnan, no Bond seemed in as top physical shape as Craig did. In the opening sequence to Casino Royale, we instantly see a different physicality to Bond. He is running across rooftops and through building sites, and at one point just straight up walking through plasterboard, yet still using his cunning style of outthinking a foe. So within this single opening sequence, we get the original traits of Bond along with something new, something fresh to the franchise. Director Martin Campbell was not afraid of challenging the status quo, yet still making things seem familiar. This might come from the fact that Campbell also directed GoldenEye from 1995, where he learnt the ropes of how to show the very charismatic British side of Bond old new style. And within Casino Royale, he ramped up the other traits of Bond, which gave audiences something new. However, you could argue that in Thunderball, released in 1965, he had a certain physicality with the underwater action sequences. But Connery's Bond never got too physical. He threw a punch and a kick here and there, but never anything overindulgent. Connery survived on his suave charisma and cunning, as did Moore and to a certain extent Brosnan. Craig, however, survives on having both a suave charisma and his physicality. Within the same film, we have Craig cunning his way through a high-stakes poker match to an all-out brawl in a collapsing Venice building towards the end of Act 3. This shows how diverse the Bond character can actually be. However, they are failing to achieve this diversifying of the character in the latest Bond, Spectre 2015, with this stoic performance throughout and then throwing you into a personal morality question. Does he choose to go back to M or run away with his new Bond girl, Dr. Madeline Swan, played by Lea Seydoux? To conclude then, Timothy Dalton's Bond tried too many things at once. The films tried to show Bond had his own agenda and he would do anything to achieve it, even if it meant disobeying direct orders from MI6. However, you could argue within certain Bond films, Bond does disobey orders, but not to a certain extent that he would start World War III, like Dalton nearly did with the Americans and the Cubans. Because of this misjudgment in what defines Bond, Dalton's Bond failed in revitalising the franchise, and how Pierce Brosnan did nothing with it but rehashed a few gimmicks from the Connery and Moore eras. The Daniel Craig era gave the franchise a fresh injection of dramatic narratives and action-packed films. Craig's era evolved into what a contemporary action film is, a spectacle intertwined with character moments to keep you, the audience, involved with the story and characters. This is down to other films such as the Bourne Identity trilogy, from 2002, 2004 and 2007, and Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible series from 1996 to 2000 and 2006, where the main focus of the films are the action set pieces. Although Bond evolved alongside its contemporary counterparts, it still held the values of the Bond franchise. The Craig films are Bond films before they are called action films. I asked earlier how much Sean Connery's salary was for Diamonds Are Forever. Now, it was released in 1971 and his reported salary was $1.25 million, and that is a lot of money. The concept of feminism within a franchise that's main character is a man and a serial womanizer you would think would be difficult, yet it is not. There is a vast variety of academia discussing the topic within James Bond films, especially within the context of Judi Dench's portrayal of M. One important piece of academia would be Michael W. Boyce's article titled Property of a Lady, Smothering Judi Dench's M, and this is where I will start the discussion, analysing Dench's evolution as M. In the article by Michael W. Boyce, he touches on how Dench's portrayal started as a strong independent female. She holds her own political and social status within the continuity of the Bond franchise. In the Brosnan era, she is shown to be in control of Bond and the world around her, cutting Bond and other people off during dialogue scenes and during briefing sessions. It is made clear by the dialogue and the choreography of the scenes. Judi Dench always appears alone in a shot and others appear in a crowded shot. This defines Dench as a leader that commands attention. Boyce argues that during the Craig-era reboot, M loses some of her previous character traits of being undeniably confident in her own convictions, and her character resorts to being uncertain about her own convictions and questioning her abilities during the Craig era. Conversely, in an article by Peter C. Cruz titled From Masculine Mastermind to Maternal Martyr, Judi Dench's M, Skyfall and the Patriarchal Logic of the James Bond films. He analyses the narrative and the characterization of M during the Craig era, in which he finds the narrative still shows M as a confident leader. However, specifically in the 2012 film Skyfall, the narrative is focusing on how each individual character makes their own misjudgments. Moneypenny missing a shot and hitting Bond, Bond himself not stopping the target, and M making the wrong calls at the wrong time. Despite this, M still is confident in her actions, yet it is the narrative that requires each character to experience a loss, not just because M has lost her all conviction, it is because the narrative requires it so. Judi Dench first began the role of M during the mid-90s when Pierce Brosnan also started playing the 007 agent in GoldenEye. This is a defining moment within the franchise because it is the first time Bond had to contend with a hierarchy that was female. Within all previous films, the female representation was solely on the shoulders of Miss Moneypenny and the many Bond girls that appeared throughout the franchise. Therefore, when Dench came into the franchise as Bond's chief, it was changing of the norms and subsequently challenged the context of feminism within the franchise. In her first appearance in the film GoldenEye, it is made known to the audience and to the people on screen. So in both contexts, Dench notes she is in a male-dominated sphere and does not care about the fact that she is the only female here. She has a job to do and gets on with it, and everyone will do as she says.
You don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
The thought had occurred to me.
Good, because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
This character development and fourth wall breaking consciousness is mirrored within the role of Miss Moneypenny in the same film, GoldenEye. Miss Moneypenny's role throughout the franchise has evolved and devolved. During the Connery era, she was an active protagonist against Bond, giving punches to Bond's sexism. However, during Moore's era, when Moneypenny could have been mistaken for one of the mindless bad guy goons, she did nothing in the film. She was a negative protagonist to Bond. However, in GoldenEye, not only do we get back the relationship of Bond and Moneypenny, the constant flirtatious and sarcastic back and forth, but we get for the first time Moneypenny calling out Bond for his sexism. This is a tonal shift for the franchise in which the main pivotal character is a serial womanizer. It suggests that there is a boundary for Bond. He can kill and womanize, but he cannot continue being sexist. This theme has continued through to the Daniel Craig era. We still have the Bond and Moneypenny relationship, But not only that, in the 2012 film Skyfall, we get to see a Moneypenny that is a field agent. She gets into the thick of the action. However, it could be argued from this massive step forward in the role of Moneypenny, it takes a step back once again, as not only does Moneypenny fail the mission, but she is also put on suspension and later told by Bond that field work is not for everyone. Within the same film, there is a contrasting evolving on a role and a devolving of a role, which leaves the role of women in Bond no further forward and no further backwards, it's just in the middle.
Never do without you.
As far as I can remember, James, you've never had me.
Hope springs eternal.
You know, this sort of behavior could qualify as sexual harassment.
This can be arguably said about Dench's role as well, as from Casino Royale, Dench plays the role in a more maternal context. She personally flies out to the Bahamas to catch Bond and implant a tracer in his arm, and is continually letting Bond's reckless actions go unpunished. This role as a maternal figure comes to the forefront during Skyfall when Bond returns from the dead. The first person he goes to see is M, and when Bond fails his physical and mental aptitude test, M still lets him keep his license to kill. These actions by M suggest that she has an emotional blind spot towards Bond. This can mean the character feels more maternal need towards Bond, or it could mean she's just judging it from an emotional connected chief. Either way, Dench's M is a more emotive M than any other iteration of Bond's chief commanding officer, known as M. Consequently, the argument that feminism within Bond has evolved into something more positive is a contrasting one, as there are arguments for and against. However, the idea that Dench's M is more maternal, I believe, is true and not in a negative sense. Within the narrative of Casino Royale, Craig's Bond has just been given the mantle of 007, and is described by M herself as a hot-headed, trigger-happy agent. Therefore, it can be suggested Bond requires a certain nurturing. As M is the chief of MI6, you would expect her to be a good leader, and a good leader understands the requirements of an individual's under command, which supports the idea that being more maternal for an agent finding his feet or calming his actions down is required. Therefore, the idea that this role unjustly placed on M, I believe, is incorrect, as the narrative of the story requires the role to be more maternal towards Bond. Conversely, it can be argued, should the narrative had gone in such a direction, highlighting an argument of the role of women in Bond films, is it positive or negative for women? Overall, feminism within Bond has evolved significantly from Dr. No in 1962 to the latest film, Spectre 2015. From being disregarded and sidelined by the narrative and Bond himself, to now where there are strong, intelligent and powerful women within the franchise. However, Bond will always be a predominantly masculine franchise, and as the Bond ethos evolves around his ego, will there ever truly be a space for feminism to grow? Especially now, as Judi Dench's M is no longer present, who will take the place of representing women within a male-dominated franchise? Which leaves Bond in a difficult period once again. After a couple decades of growth within both roles of males and females, where do the producers go next to push the franchise forward in its gender politics and its narrative structure? They have laid the groundwork for a more dynamic Bond film narrative, so whatever the case, I cannot wait to see where they are going to go with this franchise.
The name's Bond. James Bond.